So, I'm not dispensable anymore, am I? I asked, each syllable a shot in my throat. I watched my son's face, the very same face I'd cradled against my chest countless times as a baby, crumple into a desperate shame. David stood at my door, gaunt, dark circles etched beneath his eyes, clothes rumpled as if they'd escaped an iron for weeks. "Mom," his voice splintered. "I lost my job. We're bleeding money. Stephanie's working full-time and we have no one for Arthur." That familiar urge welled up. To pull him close, tell him everything would be all right. To fling open my wallet, my home, my heart. But something had hardened within me over the past weeks. Perhaps it was that word, dispensable, he'd hurled at me 2 months prior. Perhaps the nights I'd wept alone. Or perhaps simply, the sheer weight of 67 years finally taught me love isn't synonymous with doormat. "Let's talk," I finally said, stepping aside, a narrow opening to my home. But this time, like adults who respect each other, not like someone you toss aside when it's convenient. You're probably wondering how we reached this impasse, how my only son, the boy I poured every ounce of love into, could utter such a word. Dispensable. And how I, who'd always placed him above all else, found the resolve not to simply capitulate again. It all began 3 months prior, on an ordinary Thursday. The sky, a low grey blanket, promised rain. I'd baked Arthur's favorite carrot cake, planning to bring it when I picked him up from school. Our routine, 3 afternoons a week. I'd fetch my 7-year-old grandson, and we'd fill the hours with homework, games, or cartoons until David or Stephanie arrived home from work. My old sedan idled in front of their house, a house I'd actually sunk my savings into last year for roof repairs. Stephanie opened the door before my knuckles even met wood. Her face was a mask of tension, arms clamped tight across her chest. "Mrs. Nancy," she said, and a chill snaked through me. The formality was a stark departure. She usually called me Nana, or simply Nancy. "You don't need to pick up Arthur today." "Did something happen? Is he sick?" I asked, still clutching the warm cake pan like a shield. "No, he's fine. Actually." Stephanie faltered, her gaze fixed on the worn welcome mat. "We don't need your babysitting services anymore." Services. The word hit me, a blunt force trauma. 3 years I'd poured myself into Arthur's life, never once seeing it as a service. It was love. It was family. "What happened, Stephanie? I don't understand." "David wants to talk to you this weekend," she replied, her eyes skating everywhere but mine. "He'll come over Sunday." I drove home in a daze, the untouched cake beside me, my heart a leaden weight. The next few days blurred into an agonizing loop of replayed conversations. Had I said something wrong? Done something to offend? Given an inappropriate gift? Uncertainty is a silent, creeping torture. Sunday, David arrived alone, precisely at 3. No customary hug. He simply settled, stiff and unyielding, on the sofa I'd bought him years ago for his first apartment. "Coffee. I made some cornbread, the kind you like," I offered, the words hovering in the sudden chill. "No, thanks. I won't be long," he replied, his voice flat, formal as a stranger. "Mom, we need to reevaluate some things." He used that voice, his corporate voice, sharp and clipped, reserved for high-stakes meetings and negotiations. Never once had he spoken to me like that. "Stephanie and I feel you're a little too present in our lives. Arthur's getting confused about who sets the rules. You give him sweets when we've forbidden them. Let him watch TV past the time we've set." "Son," I never meant to interfere. I only ever wanted to help. If there's something I'm doing wrong, you just have to tell me, and right now, you're dispensable. We need space. Dispensable. The word dropped from his lips, casual as a weather report, while his eyes were glued to his phone. 42 years poured into raising that man, and I was dispensable. My mind reeled, a montage of memories flashing. David, newborn, small enough to nestle in the crook of my arm. The colicky nights, endless and sleepless. Fevers we battled side by side. The day Robert, my ex-husband, walked out, declaring he wasn't cut out to be a father, and never looked back. The 3 jobs I juggled: cleaner by morning, diner waitress by afternoon, seamstress by night, just so David could have school supplies, decent clothes, a modest birthday party. I saw the savings, scraped together penny by penny, for his college tuition. The swelling pride when he graduated, the first in our family. The tears of pure joy on his wedding day to Stephanie, believing he'd finally have the complete family I couldn't give him. The instant connection when I held Arthur, my grandson, for the first time. A profound sense that my life had, indeed, been worth it. All of it slammed through me in seconds, as that single word, dispensable, reverberated like a physical blow. I understand, I managed, swallowing the raw lump in my throat. I'll respect your space. David visibly deflated, relieved by my swift capitulation. He'd braced for a fight, for tears, for arguments. He hadn't anticipated dignity. Thanks for understanding, he muttered, rising. We'll call you when things settle down. After he left, I sank back onto that very sofa and wept. I wept until the tears ran dry, until my eyes burned raw and my throat ached with a hollow rasp. I wept for every sacrifice I'd made, for the paltry sum I'd ever requested in return, simply to be woven into the fabric of their lives. The weeks that followed were defined by a suffocating silence. No calls, no visits, no messages. For days, my hand hovered over the phone, dialing his number countless times, only to snatch it back before the final digit. He'd asked for space. I would give him space. I ate poorly, slept worse. I'd jolt awake in the dead of night, certain I'd heard Arthur's cry, only for the crushing silence to remind me he wasn't there. Perhaps never would be again. My apartment, once a sanctuary of comfort, now felt vast and echoing. I endlessly replayed every interaction, dissecting each word, each gesture, searching for my misstep. Had I been too present? Did Stephanie truly feel threatened by my bond with Arthur? Or was David simply desperate to prove he could raise his son without assistance, a stark contrast to his own upbringing? Then, the phone rang. It was Brenda, my Thursday bingo friend. Nancy, did you hear? David got fired 3 weeks ago. Sounds like a nasty business with a major client. What? He didn't say a word. My son works at the same bank. He said it was a full-blown scandal. David, apparently stressed to the breaking point, lost it on an elderly client who just couldn't grasp a simple procedure. Turns out the man was close friends with the regional director. In an instant, everything clicked into place. The distancing, the icy silence, the word dispensable. It was the raw, bleeding pride of a man too broken to admit he needed help. The profound shame he must have carried, after all his boasts about position, salary, status. My first impulse, a primal urge, was to call, to offer help, to throw open my home, to empty my meager savings. But something held me captive. An inner whisper. Perhaps the echo of the woman I was before motherhood consumed me, or the ghost of the woman I could have become had I not poured every fiber of my being into raising him, told me to wait. I didn't call. I didn't rush to his rescue. For the very first time, I honored the boundary he'd erected, no matter how excruciating it felt. Instead, I did something I hadn't dared in decades. I considered myself. I started attending a support group for seniors at the community center. Initially, it was just an escape, a way to find someone, anyone to talk to. But soon I saw I wasn't alone with my stories of children who took, of loneliness I hadn't chosen, of love given and never returned in kind. I picked up my brushes again, a passion abandoned the day I became a single mother. I bought small canvases, cheap tubes of paint, and used brushes. My first attempts were atrocious, but there was a profound liberation in creating something purely for myself, something that demanded no one's approval. I forged new connections. Mrs. Peterson from the 3rd floor, who invited me for tea and patiently taught me to knit. Mr. Rodriguez from next door, a widower for 5 years, who invited me to a Wednesday matinee, not a date. He'd made painstakingly clear, but the company was a bomb. Slowly, painstakingly, I unearthed Nancy. Not just David's mom or Arthur's grandma, but a woman with her own tastes, her own opinions, her own desires, stifled for decades by self-sacrifice. Then, 2 months after that fateful conversation, the doorbell chimed. David stood there, a desolate figure, his very presence a plea for help he couldn't quite vocalize. Now, in my modest living room, a steaming cup of coffee a fragile barrier between us, I studied him. My son seemed diminished, his very essence shrunken by the absence of his job title, his salary, his former status. I should have told you about the job, he finally said, the silence in the room heavy between us. I was an idiot. Why didn't you? Shame, I guess. After all my big talk, all that bragging about climbing the ladder. Then, in an instant, it all evaporated because of one stupid mistake. And that's why you pushed me away? Because of shame? He sighed deeply, raking a hand through hair just beginning to streak with gray. When had that happened? When had my boy started getting old? Stephanie was pushing. She said you spoiled Arthur rotten, that you undermined his upbringing. And I was so stressed, so desperate to make ends meet, I lashed out. It was easier to push you away than admit I'd failed. Words cut, David. Disposable isn't something you say to a mother. To anyone, really. I know, he murmured, his gaze falling to his lap. I regretted it the moment I walked out that door. But then the day stretched into weeks, and it just got harder and harder to call. To apologize. Silence again, heavy and expectant. Outside, a fine late afternoon drizzle began to fall, seeming to cleanse the very air. How's Arthur? I finally asked. He asks about you every day. Wants to know why Grandma doesn't come around, why he can't come to your place. My heart clenched. Arthur, my sweet grandson, so utterly bewildered by my sudden disappearance. And what do you tell him? At first, we made up excuses. Said you were traveling, then you were sick. But he's a smart kid. He knows something's wrong. So, what now? What exactly do you need? David took a shaky breath, clearly steeling himself. Stephanie got a full-time job. Pays less than my old salary, but it's something. I'm driving for a rideshare app while I look for something in my field. Problem is, we don't have anyone to watch Arthur in the afternoons after school. Classes end at 1. Stephanie doesn't get home till 6. And you want me to watch him during those hours? If you could, it would be a lifesaver. I looked at my son. No longer as the mother who always capitulated, always swooped in, always available despite the sting of his words. I looked at him as a woman who in these painful weeks had finally rediscovered her own worth. I can help with Arthur. That boy's my absolute joy. But we need to set some ground rules, David. Ground rules? Yes. I'm not a hired hand you bring in when convenient and discard when you're done. I'm your mother. I'm Arthur's grandmother. I deserve respect, consideration. If I'm to be part of your lives, it has to be real, not just convenient. I saw something shift in his eyes. Surprise, yes, but beneath it, a nascent respect. What are your terms, then? First, I want a sincere apology. Not just from you, but from Stephanie, too. Second, I want us to talk openly about Arthur's rules, my role in his life so I don't interfere unintentionally. And third, I want us to have dinner together once a week, as a family. David looked genuinely taken aback by my assertiveness. The mother he knew, the one who always said yes, who never imposed a single condition, was gone. I think those are fair terms, he managed finally. I'll talk to Stephanie today. Good. And David? Yes? Don't you ever call me disposable again. Don't you ever treat family like a convenience. Family is commitment, through thick and thin. He nodded, and I saw his eyes well up. For a moment, I saw in him the little boy who ran to my arms when he fell on the playground, who proudly showed me his school drawings, who slept clinging to my arm on stormy nights. Can I hug you, Mom? I opened my arms and welcomed him, just as I had countless times before. But something fundamental had shifted between us. For the first time, it wasn't just me giving unconditionally. There was mutual respect, clear boundaries, and the recognition of my worth as a person, not merely as an always available mother and grandmother. The next day, David brought Arthur as promised. The moment my grandson saw me, his small eyes exploded with light, and he launched himself into my arms with a force that nearly buckled my knees. Grandma! Grandma! I missed you so much. Why did you disappear? Daddy said you were sick, but I didn't believe him because you never get sick. I cupped his little face between my hands, a familiar lump rising in my throat. How do you explain the intricate, often cruel, emotional games of adults to a 7-year-old? Grandma needed a little time to take care of things, sweetie. But I'm here now, and I won't disappear again. I met David's gaze across Arthur's head. His expression was unreadable, a complex blend of guilt, perhaps, and raw relief. He gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a silent confirmation of a promise. Arthur, why don't you go wash your hands for your snack while I have a quick word with your dad? I suggested, and my grandson bounded toward the bathroom. Stephanie will pick him up at 6, David said, handing me Arthur's worn backpack. She wants to talk to you. I'm waiting. Mom, I know things got messy, but... David, I cut him off gently. Let's take one step at a time. Today is about Arthur. The rest, we'll talk later. He nodded, clearly relieved he didn't have to unpack everything at once. After he left, I spent the afternoon immersed with my grandson, rediscovering his whimsical stories, his vibrant drawings, his wild, wonderful theories on how clouds worked and why cats always landed on their feet. For him, it was as if those 2 months had never existed. For me, they'd been a painful, necessary education. At 6 on the dot, the doorbell chimed. Stephanie stood there, taut as a violin string stretched to its breaking point. She was a shadow of the confident daughter-in-law who'd dismissed me from her doorstep. "Come in, Stephanie," I invited. "Arthur's just finishing a drawing." She stepped inside hesitantly, as if navigating a minefield. She perched on the edge of the couch, her hands twisting restlessly in her lap. "Mrs. Nancy, She started, but her voice withered. "You can call me Nancy like before," I offered. Not from weakness, but from a deliberate choice. We're family, after all. Her eyes welled. "I'm so sorry. For the way I spoke to you, for keeping Arthur away, for everything. What happened, Stephanie? Really?" She took a shuddering breath, as if bracing for impact. "Jealousy? Insecurity? David always spoke about how you raised him alone, how strong, how capable you were. And I felt utterly diminished, like I could never measure up to the mother you were. That confession blindsided me. In all the scenarios I'd run through my mind, never once had I considered that Stephanie might feel intimidated by me. A 67-year-old woman with varicose veins and a modest pension. "And when David lost his job," she went on, "it felt like everything we'd built crumbled. He was so utterly ashamed, so defeated. I thought asking for your help would be an admission of our failure as a family." Family isn't about never failing, Stephanie. It's about having somewhere to turn when you fail. Arthur appeared in the living room just then, proudly clutching a drawing. "Look, Mommy. I drew Grandma, you, Daddy, and me. It's us four eating ice cream." Stephanie took the drawing, her gaze meeting mine, and something unspoken passed between us. A quiet understanding, perhaps the seed of a new beginning. In the weeks that followed, a new routine took root. I picked Arthur up from school 3 times a week, as before. But now there were clear, agreed-upon rules about sweets, screen time, and bedtimes. We had dinner together on Wednesdays, a new tradition we christened Family Dinner Wednesdays. It was on one of those Wednesdays, amidst the clatter of dishes after dinner, that David finally unburdened himself. "Remember when I was about 10 and I broke that porcelain vase Grandma gave you?" he asked, absently wiping a plate. Of course I remember. It was the only memento I had of her. "You never yelled. You just said objects can be replaced, but feelings can't." I smiled, the memory vivid. "And what does that have to do with now?" "When I lost my job, it was like breaking 1,000 vases at once. I felt like I'd shattered everything. Stephanie, Arthur, you. Especially you." "Why especially me?" He stopped drying the plate, his gaze drifting to some distant, unseen point beyond the kitchen window. "Because you sacrificed everything for me. You worked 3 jobs so I could go to college. You never complained, never once threw it in my face. And I wanted so badly to prove it was worth it. That your sacrifice hadn't been in vain." His words resonated deep within me. For decades, I'd secretly wondered if David even registered those sacrifices, if he truly valued what I'd poured into him. And there it was, the answer. He didn't just notice, he carried the crushing burden of feeling he had to compensate for every single one. "Son," I said, capturing his wet hands in mine, "you don't owe me a thing. What I did out of love, not to create a debt. But I wanted to make you proud, to show you'd raised someone successful." "And you think success is measured by the size of your paycheck? By your job title?" "David, I'm proud of the man you are, not what you have or do." He bowed his head, and I watched tears splash onto the kitchen floor. They weren't tears of shame or frustration, but of profound, cleansing relief. As if an unbearable weight had finally shattered from his shoulders, when I lost my job," he continued, his voice thick. "It felt like I'd failed the entire purpose of my life. And I couldn't face you. Couldn't admit I'd messed up. So you pushed me away. It was the biggest mistake of my life." I hugged my son right there, amidst the wet dishes and dinner remnants. It was an embrace unlike the countless thousands we'd shared before. Not a mother comforting her child, but two adults, raw and vulnerable, acknowledging their shared humanity, their mistakes, and their capacity for forgiveness. I remembered a day when David was about 5. We were at the park, and he insisted on climbing the tallest slide all by himself. I stood at the bottom, heart lodged in my throat, desperate to help but knowing I had to let him try. "Look, Mom, I'm doing it all by myself," he'd yelled from the very top, bursting with pride. "I see you, honey. I'm right here if you need me." That memory surged through me as I watched David, in the weeks that followed, steadily rebuilding his professional life. He landed a temporary position at a financial firm. Less pay, a lower rung on the ladder, but it was a fresh start. Stephanie earned a promotion at her job. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to stabilize their finances. And me. I continued with my painting classes, my meetings at the community center, my knitting with Mrs. Peterson. I remained Arthur's grandma and David's mom, yes, but I also remained Nancy, the woman who, at 67, finally discovered she still had boundless depths to explore within herself. One Sunday afternoon, roughly 3 months after that pivotal conversation in my living room, we were all at the park. Arthur chased pigeons. Stephanie and David chatted easily on a bench. And I, a small canvas balanced on my lap, painted the tranquil scene. "I didn't know you painted, Nancy," Stephanie commented, walking over to see my work. "I just started recently. Or rather, I picked it up again after nearly 50 years. It's beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed. "Arthur's going to want to hang this in his room. You can have it, if you'd like." Stephanie smiled, and a new, genuine warmth entered her eyes. "You know, when I first met David, he always talked about you with such admiration. I felt utterly intimidated. My mom did this. My mom accomplished that. It was like competing with a living legend. And now? Now I understand why he admires you so deeply. And I don't feel intimidated anymore. I feel inspired." That afternoon in the park was etched into my memory as a true turning point. The moment I knew our family had finally found a new equilibrium. It wasn't perfect. There were still rough edges, still compromises to be made. But it was real, honest. 6 months after that desperate Sunday when David had appeared at my door, asking for help, I received an unexpected invitation. The community center, where I attended the support group, was organizing a small art exhibition for its students, and my painting teacher had selected 2 of my pieces. They're hardly masterpieces, I told David over the phone, but they'll be displayed for a week. We'll be there for the opening, he promised, his voice firm. Wouldn't miss it for anything. On the night of the exhibition, I arrived early, a nervous flutter in my stomach like a schoolgirl. My hands trembled as I carefully adjusted the name tag under my canvases. A vibrant landscape of the park where I took Arthur, and a tender portrait of him lost in concentration over a puzzle. At 7 sharp, I watched my family step into the small hall. Arthur burst forward, clutching a bouquet of daisies almost as tall as he was. Behind him, David and Stephanie followed, smiling, elegant, as if this humble exhibition were the most significant event of the year. "Grandma, you're famous now!" Arthur shrieked, pressing the flowers into my hands. "Don't exaggerate, sweetie. It's just a little exhibition." "For us, it's the most important exhibition in the world," David said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. As we circulated through the hall, I proudly introduced them to my new constellation of friends. Mrs. Peterson from the knitting group, Mr. Rodriguez, who'd taken me to the movies, and who now, I confess, took me other, more interesting places. My painting teacher, the familiar faces from the support group. "Your mom is a phenomenon," my teacher commented to David, her voice hushed with admiration. "She has a natural talent that lay dormant for decades." I saw the pride in my son's eyes, not the self-serving pride of one validated by a relative's success, but the genuine, quiet pride of someone recognizing the intrinsic worth of a person they deeply love. Later, as the small ceremony drew to a close and we were preparing to leave, David gently took my arm. "Mom, I want to thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on us. For setting boundaries when I hurt you. For teaching me once again how to be a better man." I smiled, a profound peace settling over me, a feeling I hadn't known in years. "You know, son, I spent my whole life trying to shield you from pain, but some pains are necessary for us to grow. Like the pain I caused you with that idiotic word. Disposable," I repeated, and for the first time, the word held no sting. "Yes, exactly like that. Sometimes we need to hear the worst possible thing to truly discover our own strength." He nodded, contemplative. "I still deeply regret it." "I know, but I don't regret having gone through it. Look what I gained," I said, gesturing toward my canvases, toward my new friends, toward the woman I had become. The week after my 68th birthday, an unexpected package arrived. It was a small box, wrapped in brightly colored paper, adorned with a card in Arthur's distinctive childish scrawl. "For the best grandma in the world, who will never be disposable." Inside, a simple necklace, its pendant, a miniature paint palette. On the back, etched in tiny letters, "Essential. Yesterday, today, and always." Tears streamed down my face as I fastened the necklace, not from sadness, but from a profound gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that had forged my growth, for the love that had weathered every mistake, for the family that had finally found its true balance. That night, sitting on my apartment balcony, bathed in the glow of city lights, I reflected on the immense power of words, their capacity to wound, but also to heal. Disposable had shattered me, yet in its shattering, it had also set me free. Essential was no longer a burden, no longer an obligation to be constantly available, but a profound recognition of my intrinsic worth. Sometimes we must be declared dispensable to truly grasp how essential we are, especially to ourselves. And in that profound discovery, we find not only the strength to forgive others, but the wisdom to redefine love itself, molding it into something healthier, more dignified, more honest. The necklace gleamed softly under the moonlight, a tangible reminder that our family story hadn't ended. It had simply found a new beginning. A beginning where I wasn't merely the sacrificing mother, the always available grandmother, but Nancy, woman, artist, friend, and yes, essential. Yet now, on my own terms. And that, I discovered, a serene smile gracing my lips, made all the difference in the world.